Whenever you're ready.
All right, let me pull up my timer for me, and I will go ahead and get started. I think you, I, and most reasonable people would all agree that the best type of government is a democratic one, of the people, by the people, for the people. The right of people to rule themselves is seen as non-negotiable in our modern day Western society, but it has not always been this way. And even today, we see instances of countries across the globe who do not value the voice of their people. While most people value democracy in their government, we rarely see democracy in our day-to-day lives. It is because I believe that democracy should extend not only to the government, but to our workplaces as well, that I stand with today's resolution. Worker cooperatives ought to replace the conventional capitalist business model. Now, I am fully aware that I'm going a little against the grain here by opposing the idea of capitalism. So I'd like to start by explaining the main terms I'll be using today. When we talk about the capitalist business model, we are talking about private individuals owning and controlling businesses, property, and capital, aka the means of production. What I propose as an alternative would be worker cooperatives, where instead of power being controlled by an owner or a few shareholders, the business is controlled democratically by the employees. This can be done through direct democracy, where every employee has an equal say, or through representative democracy, where employees would vote on managers, not dissimilar to the way we would vote on our congresspeople, for example. So, why should we embrace worker cooperatives? Today, I want to look at three main reasons: satisfaction, stability, and productivity. A chronic problem of our workplaces today is a failure in employee satisfaction. Even putting aside other capitalist business issues such as wage theft, little if any health insurance, and unsuitable working conditions, the majority of jobs today fail when it comes to their own employees' happiness. This failure is a direct result of a capitalist mindset. When one person holds the reins of power and is only thinking about their own benefit, everyone else suffers. Capitalist businesses work, but they only work for one person. In capitalist systems, there is no way to ensure the needs of everyone will be met. The solution? Democratic workplaces, where everyone can bring up solutions to issues they find in the company. These issues can then be voted upon, and this instantly gives employees a voice and responsibility, as their vote can change their workplace. Unsurprisingly, employees feel more satisfied when they are no longer treated like a simple cog in a vast machine. In a study that analyzed surveys from worker cooperatives and capitalist firms in Seoul in 2016, the findings showed that, quote, while the negative relationship between job demands and organizational commitment was significant in capitalist firms, it was not maintained in worker cooperatives, end quote. Another study done in 2013 showed that home health aides at worker-owned democratic organizations were much more satisfied with their jobs than those in top-down ownership and decision-making. Moving on, worker cooperatives provide much more stability in a company. Again, traditional businesses are built with one motive: making money for the owners. This does not provide stability for the employees or even for the company. Both the employees and the company itself are seen as disposable if the owners can make more money by laying off workers or filing for bankruptcy. We have seen that worker co-ops value their workers more, which leads to higher job satisfaction, making employees less likely to quit. But not only do employees stay longer than in typical companies, but employees are fired less. If the company is facing difficulties, people are much more willing to vote for everyone to take a small pay cut rather than firing 3 employees, for example. Furthermore, a 2013 paper analyzed studies of worker co-ops and traditional companies from around the world and found that worker co-ops last as long, if not longer, than their traditional counterparts. This increased job stability is not only beneficial to the employees of the company, but to the economy as a whole, as increased job security leads to financial security and more freedom to put money back into the economy. Finally, we get to productivity. We already know that increased job satisfaction and stability lead to higher productivity, but another crucial aspect of increasing productivity is understanding the best ways to streamline production. Worker co-ops have a major advantage in this aspect, as the business is run by the experts. The people making the decisions are also the ones who are on the floor day to day, the ones actually doing the work. In sharp contrast, we see traditional companies being run by people who may have never actually stepped foot inside the walls of the company themselves. Again, this type of ownership sets no boundaries on the inherent greed of individuals at the top, which leads to less than ideal business practices. Virginie Perrotin, in a paper on worker cooperatives, looked at two studies, one from 1995 and the other from 2012, which found, quote, the way worker cooperatives organize production is more efficient, end quote. To conclude, worker cooperatives are not only better for their employees, but they are also better for the economy and businesses themselves. While we should continue to build more worker co-ops, I would also urge that we embrace today's resolution and completely replace the obviously outdated capitalist business model. Thank you.
Okay, great. I will begin my 7 minutes. Actually, I need your timer. Okay, for my negative rebuttal on this side. Okay. Our resolution today is worker cooperatives ought to replace the conventional capitalist business model. In order to address this issue correctly, my first duty is to explain the system which I am defending. I am a capitalist. First and foremost, capitalism is founded on the recognition of the property rights of every individual. The capitalist laissez-faire system posits that no outside actor should force anyone to make a certain economic choice. Theoretically, then, the laissez-faire system could take virtually any form. As long as no one is stealing anything, they can do what they wish. People could establish employee-owned businesses, worker communes, single-owner businesses, or any other model they choose. Over time, however, there has emerged a clear preference for what I will call the corporate model. At its fullest, the corporate model looks something like this. There's a board of directors, which is appointed by the stockholders. They make the final hiring and policy decisions. There's a CEO who functions as the day-to-day leader of the business and makes most managerial decisions. Depending on the size of the organization, there is then a managerial command chain down through regions, districts, and finally individual buildings. The managers at the level of individual stores will hire employees and oversee the minutiae of everyday routines. If this system could be visualized, it would look something like an hourglass. At the top are many stockholders who own pieces of the business and appoint representatives to the board. The board appoints the CEO, who then presides over a pyramid of managers. In a capitalist system, every actor wishes to make as much money as he or she can. Accordingly, the most efficient business models have been chosen. The corporate model, while far from perfect and as fallible as any human system will be, is, in most cases, the best model. Before I get into my arguments for the corporate hierarchy, I'd like to note something. I really don't have a problem with employee-owned businesses or worker cooperatives. As long as no one is forced to do it, they are a perfectly legitimate way of doing business, and I'll even concede that in certain markets or in certain cultures, worker co-ops may be the best way of running a business. It seems clear to me, however, that the majority of the time, the corporate hierarchy is the most effective. So I'm going to focus on 2 points for my argument here. One is that some individuals are more capable than others in any given field, and managerial and decision-making power should be given to them rather than less capable members. And two, the division of responsibilities and information in the corporate model is essential to the success of a business. Okay, so point one, it is an inescapable fact that in any given field, some people will be more productive than others, whether through personal character, superior education, natural talent in the field, or their personal goals and values. Some people will prove themselves more valuable to the company and be able to accept greater responsibility. In an ideal system, these people would be placed in positions of greater responsibility and have greater decision-making power based on their ability as managers and entrepreneurs. In a corporate system, each manager from the CEO down has an incentive to choose the most effective employees to promote to positions of authority. The better the managers under them perform, the more those in authority over them are able to produce. These managers would be granted decision-making power based on their rank in the hierarchy and granted rank in the hierarchy based on their ability to perform. The core philosophical distinction between this corporate model of business and the cooperative model of business is the democratic decision-making process. The cooperative model posits that a democratic decision-making process, that is, decision-making power by headcount, is more efficient than decision-making power granted by rank and fundamentally by ability and value to the company. I personally have very little faith in the unvetted majority of people to make wise decisions. The continuing failure of democracy on the governmental level shows that an indiscriminate mass will tend toward maximizing their personal benefit in the short term rather than the whole of the property in the long term. Point two, in addition to the hierarchy being structured to promote effectiveness in the company, it should also be structured to give decision-making authority to those who are knowledgeable over the areas over which they have authority. While this is similar to the previous point, there is an important difference. In the worker cooperative system, all employees are joint owners of the business and act as board of directors. While in some very small companies with only a handful of employees, everyone may be able to know enough about every function of the business to vote well. This is simply impossible on a medium to large scale. There is no way that the majority of employees will know enough about product development, marketing, public relations, supply chain management, legal regulations, budget management, and a host of other factors needed to run a business to make sound company policy or even to elect managers to those positions. At most, a handful of people, far from being a majority, will have been dedicated, educated, and disciplined enough to be well informed about every aspect of a company management to make those decisions. In a corporate system, these are the employees that would be promoted to manager positions and be making these decisions instead of the uneducated mass of workers. Having a few super informed people appointing informed specialists to positions of authority is the best system of resource allocation, as opposed to the mass of uninformed workers appointing charismatic demagogues to positions of authority based on the claims of higher wages. In summary, the worker cooperative model is based on the egalitarian assumption that a democratic system of pure headcount will result in more productivity than a meritocratic hierarchy based on the ability of individuals. This does not work in the vast majority of cases, and unless the fundamental nature of humanity changes, it will not work in the future either. Okay, so moving on to open discussion. So I'll set a 20-minute timer, but it's not a strict time I'm willing to go over by a few minutes. It's not really a problem. Okay, so since you're taking the less orthodox position in this, which is unusual for me, usually I'm the one with radical views, I'll kind of let you go first and kind of explain what you're thinking on terms of the debate.
Okay, yeah. So just looking at your first statements, it seems like your biggest problem with worker cooperatives is the idea that you don't trust people to democratically choose what's best for their companies.
Right. Yes, I think that democracy has a bad track record on many levels. I think that on a governmental level, whenever you're having the government being able to force people to do things, it is necessary. So that the government, on a philosophical level, for me, whenever an institution has the power to force you using violence, guns, prisons, then people should have a say in how it's run. But regardless, the government is far less efficient as a democratic institution than it would be as an aristocratic, monarchic, or anarchic institution. And that's the same with businesses. Because businesses don't have the power to force people to do things, workers don't have a moral right to decision-making power, and therefore the most efficient system, which is the corporate hierarchy or independent stockholders, is the best system to go with. Yeah.
Okay. So with that kind of idea, I'm just trying to get a better idea of your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
So would you say that you do have to basically have a job, you have to work in order to live, be able to afford like a home, clothing, food, all that?
I mean, depends on how you define a job, but at least for both my grandparents and my father have been self-employed for as long as I can remember. We have a very entrepreneurial family. I'm looking at an entrepreneurship now, actually, just doing some market research. So I'm very used to not going with the conventional model, not have it being under the authority of a manager. So I can't sympathize with that to a large degree. But yes, obviously having some means of sustenance is necessary, whether that's by a conventional job or entrepreneurship or investing, or there's a lot of different ways to make money.
Okay, and so basically with the idea of democracy, like when would you say that you do have the right to a say? I know you said that it was okay for government, but not for businesses. What kind of is the differentiation there?
The government can shoot you, businesses can't.
Okay. But can we agree that businesses, like especially big businesses that we see around the world, like, I don't know, Amazon, Google, like all those things, they definitely can, while they might not be able to shoot you, they can definitely affect your life in negative ways through, not being able to like afford a house or not being able to afford your food, things like that.
I mean, yes, they can definitely affect your life in negative ways if you had an alliance between all the major businesses, or even you have to include a lot of medium and small size businesses. And currently in this system, none of the businesses, even Amazon, have nearly that monopolistic power. And there are many other factors besides just businesses that have an effect on your life. In media currently, there are several very large media companies that dominate all of the all of the narrative. And those, whenever you have a media company that provides your information, if you have Google, that is the gateway to information. Whenever you have Facebook or social media, that is the gateway to social interaction. Do we have a right to democratically elect what their policies are? No, we don't. We don't own those companies. That's not our property. It's something we voluntarily choose to use. They can have a great, if I was cut off from all Google access, I would have a great disadvantage compared to everyone else around me. That would impact me negatively, but I still don't have the right to vote on their policies.
Okay. And one more question. Talking about some of the things I brought up about how statistically worker co-ops seem to be more productive. They seem to last longer, or at least as long as traditional businesses. Even if we don't have a right necessarily to democracy in a workplace, do you think it's important to consider that these democracies tend to, from the studies we have, tend to actually work better than regular corporations?
I haven't looked into those studies myself, but I mean, if so, like I said in the case, I have no problem with that. Currently, where I'm banking with a credit union instead of a regular bank. I think that I haven't looked into all details of how it works, but basically it is a more democratic procedure. Instead of having one owner that's regulating the interest rates, you have a more democratic or cooperative model, I guess, in banking. And so in certain industries, that can definitely be a better option. And my thought is really, if they work better overall, like you're saying, and again, I haven't looked at those studies, I know there are definitely successful worker co-ops out there. If they work better overall, then why aren't there more of them? If there's, I mean, we can get into this later, but if there's if there so much more employee satisfaction and stability and increased productivity, why aren't employees moving to there? Why aren't people setting up more of those if they're more productive? But we can get to that in a minute.
Yeah, that's all the questions I have for
Okay.
right now. So if you had any questions for me.
Okay, well, let's just start with that one. If employees are more dissatisfied, if it's more stable, if they have better long-term productivity, then why aren't we seeing more worker cooperatives happening? And maybe we are. I haven't looked at those studies. Maybe it is increasing rapidly right now. But if it doesn't work, if it does work, why aren't we seeing more?
Yeah, well, I would think, or I do think that a big issue, especially like in the United States, because in the United States, we really don't have, like you said, we don't have a lot of worker co-ops. In places like Spain and some other European countries, it is much more popular. But I think a lot of it comes down to how the government works. And especially looking at the United States government, there are a lot of benefits to being a capital owner, to being an investor. Things like how taxes work with businesses and investments as opposed to actual wages. A lot of that actually incentivizes people to become capital owners rather than owning a business cooperatively. So I think a lot of it has to do with governments, and also another aspect would be the fact that the capital owners exist in the first place. So it's a lot harder for someone who isn't a capital owner to begin with to actually start a cooperative, because they don't have anything of their own, any capital of their own, to actually start that up. So it would be a matter of giving people enough money to begin with that they could actually start their own businesses together.
Yeah, so I definitely agree on the government point that the government should get out of the business. I'm very much a laissez-faire capitalist in that whatever system people making individual choices, whichever system they move toward is the best decision. Government shouldn't be giving tax breaks or subsidies or tariffs, any of these protectionist policies. I would say that looking at Spain and the UK, I haven't looked into Spain as much, but in the UK, I know there is a restriction that before companies are allowed to go public, they have to offer their company for a certain rate. I forgot what the rate was, but they have to offer their company for a certain rate to the employees, for the employees to buy before they're allowed to go public with it. So in those cases as well, there are government restrictions which are protecting worker cooperatives. It's not just on the capitalist side. It does go both ways there. I guess the more general point, just to kind of get your underlying view on this. What do you think is the goal of business in any economic system? What is the end goal of the economy? What's the role of business in that?
Honestly, I think it changes depending on what economic stance you take. I would say under a capitalist system, the goal is to profit the capital owners, not necessarily to make sure that businesses thrive, because as we've seen throughout history, you can sometimes bankrupt your business and make more money off of bankrupting your business than keeping it going. But capitalism is basically to make money for the capital owners. And I would say in more left-leaning, socialist, communist, that kind of grouping of the market. It would be more to help everyone, help the workers, or to just provide the necessary things for living. So I think in a capitalist system, it's to make money for a few people at the top, and then in a socialist system, it'd be to make sure everyone is making a living wage and is having a good life, essentially.
Would you advocate for the socialist system?
um I don't really know my politics a whole lot right now, but I would say that as of right now, I call myself anarcho-socialist. So yes, socialism, not necessarily communism.
Okay, I'd like to get back to that in just a minute.
Okay.
What do you attribute modern wealth success on? Like, so in modern age, especially since the Industrial Revolution, that's whenever you've seen the capitalist model really explode. We can discuss whether that's through government protection or not, but you've seen the capitalist model really explode, and you've seen a great increase in wealth. I think over the last decade, maybe it was over the last 20 years, global poverty has decreased by half. You've seen a lot of success there. Do you attribute that to the capitalist system, or what? Because that's the most common explanation. What other things would you attribute that to?
Yeah, I would attribute the wealth overall to in just innovation. We've seen things like the internet and cell phones and all of these crazy new things coming up in the past 20 years, 30, 40, however long. But very recently, we've had a lot of innovation that we really have not had at any other time in history. So I think that is a big thing. But also I would say just on top of that, yes, we have had a lot of wealth created globally. But also at the same time, we have seen a wealth disparity happen between the lowest earners and the highest earners at the top. So while wealth is growing globally, we do see a higher disparity between the people at the top and the people at the bottom. So.
Do you believe that the people at the bottom are still growing in wealth?
Relative to what they were at before, yes, I would say so.
So this is something that I found confusing in a lot of areas. What is the problem with inequality? That's, for me at least, looking at everything in the natural, everything in human society. You have writers, you have the top five, J.K. Rowling and Stephen King. You have those everywhere, and you have the bottom 95% of writers nobody reads. Those are only very niche. And when you have political system, everybody talks about the president, the vice president, and the speaker of the house. Everybody talks about those, or the few major senators, representatives. They have captured the vast majority of media attention, and nobody looks at the rest of the 600 of them. And that any system you choose, whether it's in the economy or not, you're going to have a few at the top who get the vast majority of the market share, whether that's economic or media attention. And the rest don't, because those are the ones who outperform all the rest. And especially in this age, the internet, when anyone can access anything, everyone's going to gravitate toward the few top people. So I don't see this as simply a capitalist phenomenon, but something that happens in all human society. And I don't see why it's a bad thing.
Well, I think in a lot of areas of society, inequality is not necessarily a bad thing. The problem I have with it in a capitalist system is basically, you can see in a lot of instances, the people at the top didn't necessarily get there because of talent. A lot of times it is inherited wealth, or it is other factors that they have, whether it be connections or just power in general. It's a power structure that happens more by how you were born, like who your parents were, what kind of community you were born into. That is what perpetuates who's at the top and who's at the bottom more than actual talent. So that would be my issue with it.
I don't know for sure, but from what I understand, Jeff Bezos was a relatively middle class guy. And you gave the example earlier of Amazon being the company, major company that controls people's lives. If a middle class guy can rise to become one of those top billionaires in the world, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, you see a lot of these people that are at the top and have a lot of market control right now, but come from middle class background. I don't see where that's obviously, I say in government systems and in media, maybe you can get a lot of inherited wealth, and some of the royal things, especially looking in Asia and in the Middle East, where they have a lot more government control in the markets. You can see inherited wealth sustain over longer. I think I saw one statistic that inherited wealth generally dissolves in the third generation. So I just don't see how it's a major market force outside of government control in the United States specifically.
Yeah, well, I would say inherited wealth, I would say, is part of it. I don't know where like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk's parents or their financial background. But I do know that it's a lot harder, first of all, to come from the bottom, like working class, all the way up to where Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are, then middle class. A lot of times with middle class, you have a starting amount of wealth. You're able to go to college, things like that. But also the idea of just the inherited power of being in positions where they probably had, good families who helped them go to college, who helped them, set them up for success.
Mhm.
And I feel like there's a lot more to it than just wealth. Again, I talked about connections, like who your parents know, being able to go to college. All of those things also contribute to who is at the top. And you can go and you can see people who are in the lowest classes of society, who are living in like the inner cities and things like that, who do have a lot of potential, but they'll probably never actually make anything because of where they are in society.
So going back to an interesting point, you said you're an anarcho-socialist. I am not a full anarcho-capitalist, but I do have sympathies there. I do think they have a lot of legitimate points. So in anarcho-capitalism, the idea is based on, or in libertarianism, but to a greater degree with anarcho-capitalism, is that everyone has the absolute right to private property, that no one can tell them that they can't do something with their own property. As long as they don't infringe on someone else's rights, they own that. They can make contracts. If I'm a plumber and I have some extra plumbing tools, and I can say, hey, here, sign this contract. You take my tools and go work on that guy's house. You pay me 25% of the return and bring my tools back. That's the starting of a business. That's a contract. They're using their private property, taking that and using that contract and using it according to a contract and working with someone else. They're owning a capital, benefits that other person because they get to use the tools, and benefits them because they get kickback from that. So the principles on libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism is the ability to control your private property. How do you combine anarchism with socialism? That seems to be a contradiction in terms to me.
Yeah, so I will say I used to, like a year ago, I would have considered myself a right-leaning libertarian, but over the past year I've kind of looked at things, and anarcho-socialism, basically it has the ideals of socialism, where everyone should, the workers should own the means of production, and that society should be based not towards creating wealth for individuals, but for creating happiness and equality for everyone. And basically anarcho-socialism has the ideals of the government needs to stay out of my business. I still support, like, I can have as many guns as I want if I want them. And, I support all of those kind of libertarian ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we do think that the government would need to provide a baseline of saying, listen, you can't use power of owning capital. You can't use that to exploit people. Everyone should have an equal shot. And that's basically the main difference between anarcho-capitalism and anarcho-socialism, is the idea that owning capital creates a power dynamic that is inherently unfair. And so anarcho-socialism would be taking that away.
So theoretically, if you had hundreds of guns, then you now own capital and you're exploiting people. If you have too much capital, then so that does restrict every aspect of life.
If you call that capital, yeah. But with anarcho-socialism, we're not necessarily saying that we're getting rid of all property. Like, if you can still have a house with anarcho-socialism, you can still have like pens.
Can you have a multi-million-dollar house?
As long as it wasn't made, or you didn't get that house through owning capital, through using things that you own to create wealth. Because that's basically what capitalism is using things you own to create wealth by forcing other people to work for you, because people have to make money.
Forcing people to work for you. Okay, interesting.
Well, okay, you might not call it forcing, but I would call it forcing people to work for you, because you have to have money to survive, basically. And under capitalism, the only way to get that money would be by working for people who can pay you almost whatever they want. Under an anarchist society, literally whatever they want. I think, if you didn't have a minimum wage. And just basically the idea that capitalism puts owners in a position of power, and it doesn't work the way that we think about, where it's like, the employee wants what they want, the employer wants what they want, and they come to an agreement somewhere in the middle that's fair. Capitalism is not fair because there is someone in a position of power. Hopefully that makes sense. I feel like that was really confusing.
So taking a slightly different tack, going back to the fundamental difference between worker co-ops and capitalist model is democracy, I think.
Yeah.
Do you think practically the vast majority of the world, especially the Western world right now, are democracies, usually representative democracies. Do you think, by and large, they have succeeded?
Those governments?
Yes.
I would say yes. I think democracy has succeeded, at least more so than dictatorships and things like that.
Do you think that over time, say, whenever America was founded, we had very little law. We didn't really have a system there, a system, governmental or cultural system like a lot of other countries did. So America's an interesting exception there, is that we went from basically anarchy in the American West to a democracy now. Do you think America has improved over that time? Not just economically, but in the social and governmental systems? Because obviously, over time, like you say, innovation has improved things generally, but in the systems.
I think I'd say that yes, our systems have improved. Looking back to like anarchism, there was a lot more like human rights violations back then. We had slavery, we had women didn't have the right to vote, and there was a lot of crazy stuff that went on in the Wild West, all that. And I think now that we have democracy and we have that baseline of rights for people, that's really important. And I know you don't agree that people have a right to democracy in their workplaces, but I would say that is an important thing. You do have a right to have a say in your workplace, because it is where you spend the majority of your time. It's it's the major power structure that we have in our day-to-day lives. Like the government is our ultimate power structure, but our day-to-day lives, we live in our workplaces, and so it's important that we have the right to have a say in what's happening there.
So under your idea, under the system of anarcho-socialism, under worker cooperatives, would people be allowed to buy and flip houses?
To buy what?
Buy and flip houses.
Buy and flip houses. Well, under socialism, houses would not actually be a commodity. So houses would just be something that you get no matter what, because it's a basic of life. But if we're talking about worker co-ops and not necessarily in a fully socialist economy, yes, you could buy and flip houses. But if we're talking about a purely socialist economy, houses are not something that could be flipped, because they are something you get no matter what.
So doesn't it seem like so going for the pure socialist thing, since we're going for looking at the ideals of both of these cases, hopefully.
Yeah.
The time just for this just went up, but if you don't mind, we can keep going for a little bit longer.
Yeah, I'm fine.
I said it's like a 10-minute timer, so we don't just go on and forget about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I could talk about this forever.
Yeah, me too. So in a ideal socialist system, which I assume is what you're advocating, doesn't it seem like a bad idea that people can't buy and improve houses? Doesn't that seem like a good thing that would increase the net value in the world? You have a house that's run down, someone buys it, flips it, and makes it that has a higher value. Someone else buys it contractually, so now they get a better house, and because they're willing to exchange money for that, the person who flipped it gets money, gets wealth from that. Doesn't it seem like a fundamental economic error to restrict that whenever everyone's consenting?
Well, you're not necessarily restricting people's ability to like improve their houses or things like that. It's just simply saying that everyone is, by nature of existing in a society, no one should be without a house. So houses wouldn't really, it's not necessarily saying that houses should not be improved upon and then sold again. It's more saying that houses should not be something that you have to buy. And that would kind of decrease the market for houses, because if everybody has one, then there's no reason to like buy one, if that makes sense.
Okay, so how would you define a business?
A business? I would say that it is trying to think of a word that's not synonymous with business,
yeah.
But it is a organization that is set up to produce a good of some kind, that would be hopefully beneficial to society. And it is made up of people who put their time and effort, or money and capital sometimes, into that organization to help it grow and thrive.
Okay, so let's say I have a scenario: two people. I have a vacuum. Someone else, person A has a vacuum. Person B does not have a vacuum. Would a situation like that theoretically happen? Person A has a capital, has a resource that they could use either personally or rent out to someone else. Is that a situation that's untenable under socialism?
I don't know about pure socialism, but I don't think would be untenable under anarcho-socialism, because anarcho-socialism is automatically like less state restrictions. So you could still have like trading within anarcho-socialism.
So say person A is, say person B was looking to work as a house cleaner. They saw, hey, I know this person who wants their house cleaned every week, but I only have a broom. If I can do it more efficiently with a vacuum, I'll spend less time there and be able to spend my time more wisely. Hey, can I give you $10 and use your vacuum every week? Person A says, yeah, sure, because I only need it once a month. And so person B takes it and goes and back in someone else's house, and they get a net benefit. And all parties involved get a net benefit from that because they're all doing it contractually of their own free will. Would that be considered a business? And then would person B have a right to vote in what the practices of person A are in that situation?
Would it be considered a business? I think the person who's becoming a housekeeper or house cleaner, they would have a business. Using the vacuum, I don't know if the person who owned the vacuum would really have any say in that, because it's not their business, even though they would be using their vacuum. But I would say, like, ultimately, when we're talking about this kind of stuff, the real heart of the issue is that, in your example, people are being forced to work, but by the nature of needing money. So people are being forced to work, and because people are forced to work, because the person would have to vacuum houses, would have to be a housekeeper, they have a right to choose what happens in that workplace. So because the housekeeper is the one doing the work, she's the one doing the cleaning, she's the one who would have a right over what happens in that business, because she needs to do the work. She's the one producing the benefit to society. So she would have a right over what happens with that business.
Do you think that a democratic system in a business would be overall more efficient and productive than a hierarchical system, or do you just believe that it would provide more benefits to the employees?
No, I believe it would be more beneficial to the business, as well as the employees. It would not be more beneficial to capital owners, obviously, because they would not be a part of worker cooperatives. But as I showed from a couple of those studies in my case, it has been proven, 2 or 3 different studies that have been done worldwide have shown that worker cooperatives last as long, if not longer, than traditional businesses. They go longer before they fail. And they also are, they tend to be much more efficient and productive than their traditional counterparts.
You said the first study, well, would you mind sending me the links to those studies after this, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely.
That'll be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
The first study said that worker cooperatives tend to last longer than capital owned businesses. Doesn't that seem to suggest that there is a high turnover rate in the capitalist economy, and therefore they can't gain monopolistic control over the workers?
I would say there is a high turnover rate, but there still is monopolistic control, because our capitalist society is mainly run by a few big corporations, whether we're talking about big tech, or whether we're talking about like the food industry that is only run by a very select few corporations, or even like looking at medicine and things like that. In each sector of the market, there are a few big businesses that really control the majority of the market. So while someone might be able to go to a different company, there still is monopoly, there still is control by the capital owners that you can't really escape out of when you have to work for somebody who owns capital.
In Austrian economics, I'm an Austrian in that school. One of the fundamental a priori arguments, I guess, is that in any relationship between two people, if they both contractually agree to an economic exchange or social exchange or any other exchange, they both contractually agree to that, then both parties are better off than before. Would you accept that as a theory?
I would say that as a theory, it sounds nice, but it doesn't work out in our society.
So say you have Amazon in your town, and that's which it seems to me be highly unrealistic, but it's this theorized it's the only business in town. You can't move because there's only desert for miles around, and you can't get the gas to leave town. You have a choice to work for Amazon or to try to start your own business, which may or may not succeed. Let's say it has the lowest chance of success, or you could just try to grow a garden in your backyard and be self-sustaining. If you chose to work contractually for Amazon, no one's forcing you to because no one's violating your rights if you don't, then wouldn't that benefit both parties? Wouldn't that be a mutually beneficial exchange?
I would still say no, because when we're talking about the contract with Amazon, Amazon would be the one in the powerful position in that contract. So it would not be mutually beneficial because Amazon would be able to, for instance, say what your wages were, and you really, as an employee, as a potential employee, would not be able to not fight, but you wouldn't be able to, on your own behalf, argue for a more fair wage or a more fair working hours or whatever that may be. So under a capitalist system, contracts can be made, but when someone is holding the power, when someone's holding the capital, they hold the ability to really force you to do what they want. Or your other option is to not work, which again, as I've stated a few times, if you don't work, you don't have food, you don't have enough money for a roof over your head, and you can't survive without having money. So the contract is not inherently equal or fair under a capitalist system.
So one thing I find interesting, I haven't really thought this through, so you can give me your perspective on it. You said that one of the problems with the capitalist system is that people either have to go for these monopolistic corporations or be self-sustaining, and self-sustaining is inviable, that you can't, to have any sort of reasonable standard of living, you have to trade with other people. So let's say you have two people who are completely self-sustaining, they're dirt poor, dying of disease out in the wilderness. They decide to work together. One of them is going to hunt, one of them is going to fish. They can both do it more efficiently and they can trade. Therefore, they're both better off from that. As you add more and more people onto that system of trading, everyone gets more and more efficient and wealth increases, which seems to me at least to be the story of what a lot of human civilization and economics have been, is that increasing network and increased efficiency and division of labor in order to achieve that. But what it seems to be in socialists, in your idea of socialism, is restricting people's ability to make those contracts, and instead saying, okay, no, we all need to vote on how much this guy's going to fish, or how much fish you can trade. We have to restrict that based on a common consensus, rather than being able to, timer just went off, rather than being, so I'll let you respond to this, rather than being able to do it contractually and where everyone increases by mutually beneficial. It seems to be going against the very principle that your principle is saying that you either have to be self-sustaining or work for a capitalist monopoly, and being self-sustaining is not viable. Therefore, we should have restrictions on trade, which is the very thing that brings people out of self-sustainability into a wealthier market. I don't know if that makes sense. That's kind of a long description, but if you kind of get an idea, you can give me that, and then I guess we can move into your closing statements and my closing statements, and we'll finish up.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and set my timer and just
Okay.
respond in my closing statement. Okay, 5 minutes. So basically, I would say in response to that, again, it's a good idea, it's a good concept, it's a good theory, but in reality, we don't have systems where, like you said, one person is fishing and one person's hunting, and then they trade. That's not how capitalism works in our modern day society. How it works is one person has all of the fishing poles, let's say, and all of the guns, and you would go to that person having nothing, having no ability to fish or hunt, and you would say, I need to fish and hunt in order to survive, in order to make money. And they then, because they have all of the capital, they have the fishing poles and the guns, they are then able to manipulate you because you have no bargaining power in that instance. So the real problem with capitalism is one person has all the bargaining power and the other does not. With going to the idea of worker cooperatives, since I'm trying to do my closing statement as well, the idea of worker cooperatives is, again, we're getting rid of that capital owner. We're getting rid of that person who would have all of the power, all of the ability to really manipulate the workers and the businesses. So with worker cooperatives, we are saying that we are going to let people have the ability to have the fishing poles or the guns, have the resources to actually advocate for themselves in the workplace. So I would just say, to kind of end, I think worker cooperatives are more beneficial because they are democratic. I believe that we need democracy in our day-to-day lives, because while democracy and government is also important, we don't really deal with the government on a daily basis. And what we do deal with are corporations. And corporations are the people, or not people, they are the capital owners are the people who are able to basically tell us whether or not we get to eat today, whether or not we get to pay our rent this month or our electric bill. So better alternative to capitalist businesses would be worker co-ops, where everyone has an equal say in what happens in the company. This is just more fair, and I think people do have a right to a say when it comes to their work, when it comes to what they are producing for the society. And then again, just looking at my points of satisfaction, stability, and productivity. Quickly talking about all those studies again, we do see that employee satisfaction is higher in worker cooperatives, which is, I think, pretty obvious that people are happier when they have a say, but also the jobs themselves are more stable. People leave the jobs less, and the businesses die less under worker cooperative control. And also, these worker cooperatives are more productive because the people who actually do the work are the ones making the decisions. So the experts on the work are the ones who are making the decisions on how to be more productive. And this obviously, in the end, as the studies have shown, causes more productivity in the workplace. So I would say by all of those metrics, worker cooperatives are better for our economies. And I think that that is why worker cooperatives ought to replace the conventional capitalist business model.
Great. I will begin my 5 minutes and closing statements. Okay, so we've discussed a lot today, ranging from the fundamental nature of economy and democracy to Amazon, and getting into some hypothetical examples here. So obviously we can't cover everything. It's a very wide field. I was listening to a debate recently. Actually, no, I was reading a book recently. I just finished it. It's called Democracy, the God That Failed, by Hans Hermann Hoppe. He's an interesting thinker. I don't agree with him on everything, but he made a lot of really interesting points about the nature of democracy and the government specifically, but it can apply to private sector as well, and basically saying that everyone there is motivated to use the government to achieve their own ends, rather than doing it for the overall benefit of a society. Whereas an aristocratic or a monarchic government would be in power longer, and therefore would be interested in preserving the system as a whole and preserving the value of all the property and capital within that. And we didn't really get into that this time, but I would say the same applies as well within the private sector. That whenever you have capital owners and CEOs, managers that are promoted those positions based on merit and own the capital, have a vested interest in the long-term success of the business, you have a higher likelihood of success in the long term. And you brought up some studies saying that worker-owned businesses tend to last longer, greater employee satisfaction, and obviously that's the case in those situations. And as I said in my original argument, there are markets out there and cultures out there which are more conducive to worker cooperatives, and I think that's why they've succeeded in those areas. And under certain government protections, I think that has a role to play in it as well. But in certain markets, they have succeeded, and that model has worked. However, I think that because they've worked there and because they've not worked in areas like the United States, shows pretty clearly that they are more efficient there and they're not efficient here. And that's okay. That in this capitalistic laissez-faire system, we can have different models. We can have single owner businesses. My father's owned multiple different businesses. And by the way, I didn't bring this up in the debate because this is not really an argument, just from personal experience, though. We've never had problems with dealing with a corporate monopoly. My father has a social work degree, and he's owned a sweet shop and landscaping. So the degree did not benefit him there. Neither of my grandparents have degrees, and they both own their own business at least some point during their life. For most of their career, they've owned their own businesses. The corporate monopoly, as you seem to think, hasn't really, as far as I'm aware, shut out a lot of people there. But that's not a study or anything, so I'm not using it as a major example. But the underlying philosophy of democracy in the workplace, and the idea that people are better off whenever they're not allowed to trade freely, whenever everyone is forced to give everyone else involved in the association a say, I think is fundamentally flawed. The idea, the a priori argument that whenever both parties are involved in a contractual agreement, they're both better off, is a fundamentally true doctrine. I don't see there's a way that can be disputed, even in a situation where Amazon theoretically is the only company you can go to. You can contractually choose to work for them or not. Even if they set the wage even very low, you can still choose to do that or not to do that. If you choose to do that, then you're better off than you were before by the fact that you chose to do that. And if you don't choose to do that, then choosing not to is the more beneficial option. In any of these contracts, what you choose is going to be, at least what you think is the more beneficial option. So I'm rambling a little bit here, but just to finish up, I believe that capitalism is the more efficient model because it's run by those who have a vested interest in the market, and in situations where cooperatives work out, then excellent. I have absolutely no problem with that. But the idea that a government or any other institution has the right to tell people what they can and can't contractually do, and that capital owners have to allow people to have a say in how that capital is used, violates fundamental rights of property, in my opinion, and will eventually result in a regression back to the individualistic, survivalistic economic model, which we've managed to move out of in the past, since the Industrial Revolution, basically, whenever you had this corporate model begin taking precedence and increased worldwide systems. So we can talk more after this if you want, but as the debate, I think we've told both sides of the argument, and this has been really interesting. Glad to have either you on whatever I'm producing or me putting it on your YouTube account. I don't know which way it's going here, but I enjoyed talking with you. The debate was fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Okay, so I will stop recording now.